Hey, what's up guys, Pablo Munoz here. Today is a very exciting video because I'm going to give you an overview of the ZBrush for iPad version. So this is the full version of ZBrush but on an iPad Pro. This is a character that I've been developing during the beta testing, so I had the opportunity to play around with these features and the whole interface and everything for a few months now. So I will give you my 2 cents and what worked for me and how I transition from the full version of ZBrush in the PC with a keyboard and everything into just working on the iPad with no peripherals or any keyboard, which I think worked really well. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, let's go ahead and start by loading up ZBrush so I can show you everything from scratch. Another thing just to keep in mind, I'm using an iPad Pro, so this is the larger size of the screen, obviously, for the iPad. So it's a bit more comfortable, but still, relatively small compared to what you see in a full 27-inch monitor, obviously. So I think one of the great things that they've done for this version of the iPad is that they managed to put everything in a small space. So it feels very comfortable. Anyway, so once we open the ZBrush for iPad, this is where you're going to be greeted with. You have some news and articles from the ZBrush Central. You also have your sculpts in here. And one thing that I found actually really interesting is that you can click on the ZBrush Central here and you'll see some top row items and some of the staff picks, and you can obviously go through them and actually click on any of these and it will open up in a browser and you can just read more about it. So I think this is a nice integration of something that is fairly simple, but it just makes the experience a bit nicer and more integrated. Now, if I click on my sculpts, which is the same thing as in the homepage, clicking on View All in here, that gives you access to all your sculpts. You can have C tools. In my case, I've been working with C projects for the most part, but you can save as C tools. You see, I have all my C projects here, and I also have quick saves for different things that I've been testing and trying out. So it has the same sort of functionality as the PC version, right? Now, the way that you start is actually pretty simple, but I want to show you a couple more things just so that they're in there. So at the top right here, you'll see I have this sort of character icon. Right, so if I click on this one, this is kind of like your account settings. In my case, I have access to the full version of ZBrush for iPad, so I will be able to demonstrate all the features and all of that. I believe for the free version, you don't have access to all the brushes, for example, so things like that just to keep in mind. But I will be able to show you in full what the iPad 4 is. So all you need to do is, if you have a license or if you purchased ZBrush for iPad, you can just activate it from here. And once it's activated, you're good to go. Now, the other thing is, obviously, before we get into the new sculpt, you can click on import, and that allows you to import anything or any file that you bring into your iPad. So you can, load up an FBX or an OBJ or download it from the browser directly on the iPad and then import it in here. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and I'm going to jump into the Shaman. So this is the one that I worked for my beta testing, and just because I think it looks nicer than a simple sphere. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the UI. We're going to start from the left and move our way around the UI so that you know where palettes and menus have in place. So at the start, we have the home that sends us back to the welcoming screen. You can save, you can import, and then you can export things as well. So these ones are self-explanatory. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but if I click on this one, you see you can export a 3D model, you can export a texture, you can export an image, you can export pretty much anything that you want, and you have different options in here. Then the import is exactly the same thing. And you'll see the first one is the GoSee. We're going to come back this in a different video. This is probably one of my favorite things, that it basically allows you to send things from the PC version into your iPad and continue working on the go, and then send it back from here to the PC version. So it works with the PC. Now, one thing to mention about this feature of the GoSee is only available for ZBrush 2025. So the new full version of ZBrush for PC is the only one that is compatible with this GoSee for the iPad at this stage. But again, you can import a 3D model, you can import a grid, you can import an alpha, a brush, all of that. Now, with the brushes, I just want to mention this because it is, at least for my workflow, is very important. I have a bunch of packs and brushes that I've customized and that I created for ZBrush. So for me, it's very important to be able to use those brushes in ZBrush for iPad, and I was able to do that very easily. So I just went ahead and selected the files. Obviously, I sent them to the iPad first, brought in the file, and they work perfectly fine. So all the capabilities of those brushes that I've set up for working on the computer, on the PC, work perfectly fine as well in here. So I just want to mention that because this is pretty much the same thing. You just import the files that you would import in the PC version, but for the iPad. One more thing, sorry, to mention is if you click once on the save button, it's going to, by default, save the project. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the default action. But if you click and hold, you can actually save as, and then you can determine if you want to save it as a C tool or as a project, right? You can also click on save next, and that will incrementally, or like save incrementally. That way it's like 01, 02, and so on and so forth. Now the user settings, I'm going to leave this one for later because that's from here, from this preference on the top right. And this one is actually very important. This is the equivalent to your preference palette in the full version, or like the PC version. So we're going to come back to this in a second. Now, the next thing that we have here on the left-hand side, those are the palettes. I'm going to use my pen now. So these are like the main palettes that you would have access to, that you would need to use. So we have the brush palette. So if I click on that one, you have the brushes. One thing that I found really convenient that they have added, or they have customized for the iPad, is the fact that you have these categories, right? So these categories are fantastic because it allows you to filter by, let's say, clay, and then you have all your clay brushes. By cloth, you have all your cloth brushes, which is really cool. It works, dynamics and everything works really well here as well. You have your knife brushes, your mask, and so on and so forth, right? So that allows you to filter by different brushes. You still can filter by the letters, so you can just type, or click on the letter. But I think for me, it's more convenient to just click on the one that I want. And not only that, you can also favorite brushes now. So you can have your favorite brushes that you use the most in here. You'll notice everything that I have here is actually part of my custom brushes. I'll link in the description to some of those in case you're interested, but they're exactly the same brushes that I use for the PC version. Now to move on, let's go ahead and check the other palette. So this is the stroke palette. Again, you have access to all the settings that you want for the different strokes. So if I change this one to drag reg or to freehand, it's gonna act in the same way. So this is your stroke palette. This is your alpha palette. You can choose any alpha you want. The same thing as the brushes. You can filter by the standards, or standard alphas. If you have custom folders with things like hard surface, that sort of thing, you can add them here as well. Then you have the textures. At the moment with the standard brush, I don't use any texture, but this is how you can apply it or use any of these textures. And then you have the material. Right. For this project, I'm been using the Skin Shade 4 just because I have poly paint, but for the most part, I would be working with, let's say, something like Madcap Gray. But let's go back to Skin Shade 4, which is here at the bottom. And again, you have your own materials. In my case, I haven't tested many materials in this case of custom materials, but you can add your custom materials. So for example, marble, if I click on marble, and in fact, let me just turn off, I'll come back to this in a second. So let's go ahead and do of poly paint off. There we go. Go back to this one so that you can see more of the material. There we go. So this is a custom material, and if you're familiar with the things that I've done online as well, you might be familiar with this, which is the comic material, which works perfectly well in here. You see this is a little bit more grayish than the hands because the hands are the active element. It works exactly in the same way as the PC. So there you go. Those are like the main 5 palettes that I would say that you would use the most, at least when you're working to create something on the iPad. Now, let's go ahead and switch back to the Skin Shade 4. And this is another really cool thing, by the way. The reason is just going to list, obviously, anything that you use recently. So it's a lot easier to just go back and select things like I just did before. And let me just go ahead and turn on the poly paint again for everything. Again, we'll come back to this. But I just wanted to highlight that these are the 5 main palettes that you would use to change your tools, brushes, materials, alphas, stroke, that sort of thing. So it's very, very important to have this palette here on the left-hand side because it's anything that is related with your interaction with the model, sculpting, that sort of thing. Then you also have the colors, of course. You can just bring in this palette, which is really nice. You also have these modifiers, which allows you to change colors a bit more precise if you wanted to. But I quite like the color wheel. Is nice and big, and you can also click on the color picker and let's say choose this color, and it will pick the yellow color of this section right here. So pretty intuitive stuff. I'm just gonna keep it simple. That's another important palette. And then in the next item here, we can change the RGB intensity. In this case, the standard brush doesn't use any RGB, so you see it is turned off. But if I select something like this one, which is paint, RGB is gonna be enabled, and we can change the opacity of that. So this is a really cool thing. Now let's go ahead and go back to the standard one, and to the next one, we can change the focal shift. So this one allows you to change the focal shift. So you see my cursor here. Let's put it over an area. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, in here. If I just go ahead and change this, it's actually really hard to see. So let me just switch to the full screen here. So this is showing you the full screen of the iPad. So it's a little bit better. It's just that you won't be able to see where I clicked. But now that we are in here, so if you pay attention to my cursor and I just go ahead and change this, you see what I'm doing is changing the focal shift. So that is really convenient. So that's how you do it. You can also click on this number, and then you can also type it. It's very, very simple. It's like a little calculator. To me, that works perfectly fine. Then you have the size of the brush. This allows you to change, obviously, the cursor. You see how that is affecting the cursor. And then you have the C intensity. Now, from the C intensity, you can switch to C sub or C add, which is the same thing as changing or pressing the modify alt. But it's in there if you needed to. Same thing with the RGB. You can enable material RGB or mRGB, which is material plus polypaint. And then just to finalize this, we have the undo and the redo. So this is a very important palette, a very important kind of like section. But I just want to give you a couple more tips. Now, if I want to go ahead and change something like C add on the fly, if I click on it or if I tap on it, it will bring this slider, right? So that is just tapping. But if I hold it, I will be able to just hold it and move my finger up and down. So that it makes it a little easier, and when I release, it just goes away. So all I need to do is tap, hold, and then do this to change the intensity or changing the size. I mean, the same thing, you hold it and you move it around. So a couple of kind of like hidden ways of manipulating these controllers that are fantastic for the iPad, and I think they work really well. Now, another really cool thing, and that's something that I'm going to show you when we get to the user preferences, is that I change the way that I manipulate the brush size. So I don't use this button right here. Instead, I can use 3 of my fingers and then slide up and down, and that changes my brush size. And if I go left and right, I can actually change the focal shift. So you see, I basically have this easy version to change the focal shift or up and down for the brush size. So it makes it a lot more intuitive, and all I have to do is just use my spare hand, let's say, or even the hand that I'm using to sculpt to change my brush size, because this is something that I use often. Let's go ahead and move on for the rest of the interface. So the bottom one, and we're gonna come back to this little thing in just a bit, because that's the modifiers, and it's another fantastic addition for the iPad version. Now let's go ahead and switch back in here so that I can show you a few more things that I can point out. So at the bottom bar here, you have your main brushes, the ones that you use the most. Again, these are kind of like the default settings or the default brushes that you can use. And I just want to mention that hopefully you notice there's like a couple of bars in here, a couple of lines. Yeah, hopefully you can see that. So that are kind of like dividers or ways of dividing visually the types of brushes that you have. So basically, this one is your gizmo. So if I think the hands are selected by default. So in my case, so if I click on the gizmo, it's going to bring in that gizmo in there. So I can bring in the gizmo. There we go. So this is the gizmo, and I think the hands are selected, so I can just move them around. So this is like an entire arm. Obviously, that's not what I want. I want to undo that. But this is your gizmo right here. Then if you click on this one, this is your Dynamesh. So I'm not going to Dynamesh anything. And I'll come back to this later in another video. But you have your Dynamesh options in here to turn them on and off. Let's undo that. Didn't want to Dynamesh my hands. You have your Sculptris Pro. You have your Series Measure, which if I click on this one, you'll see I have some properties here to do the Series Measure. And then you have your Subdivide directly in this bar. And then you also have your Booleans. So these 5 areas right here, these 5 buttons, they're actually palettes or sections of other palettes that you will find in the PC version. They're not necessarily any brushes, right? So even though this is kind of like a brush palette or a brush dock, let's say, you have your brushes up to this point, and then you have your gizmo, and then you have access to these palettes. So it just makes it easier because you can, like I showed you with the Series Measure, you can click on this one, and then you have your settings. You can change the polygon count directly in here. You can set it to double, half, whatever you want, expand the Series Measure options to keep groups, all of that good stuff that is part of the PC version. So you have it in here. You have the ability to click on Series Measure, and it will do it just fine, right? So all of that is in here, and the idea is that you don't need to access too many palettes. You can just be free to create as long as you have access to the main things. That's all you need. And in my opinion, I think they have done an incredible job translated such a complicated software, and in terms of the UI and all the elements that it has, into a concise and simple UI that just works. So kudos to the ZBrush guys for creating such a simple interface. But let's go ahead and move on. So this is another very important. You'll notice there is a couple of dots. Hopefully you can see again at the bottom. So that means you can actually slide these and customize your UI. Again, the customization of the UI is only available for the paid version of the iPad, ZBrush for iPad version. So you might, if you use the free version, it might not be in there. So if I just use my finger to drag, you'll see I have a custom set of brushes. These are only brushes, and all of these brushes are my custom brushes that I imported. So I have things like clothing, and I'll cover that in another video, but these are custom brushes. If I keep going, You also have access to, let's say, your masking brushes, the selection brushes, clipping brushes. Again, all of these are things that I set up for myself so that I can just go between the brushes that I use for sculpting and the brushes that I use to kind of like interact, create masking, selecting, that sort of thing. And then you have this one if you want to add another bar, let's say. But I think these two are great for what I need. And if I want access to the most used ones, I have this bar in here. Now, the next thing here on the right-hand side, this is access to the nitty-gritty of what is behind the scenes, kind of like the specifics or the details of every palette, plus some of the stuff that you also find on the right-hand side of the default or the vanilla version of the PC version. So you have things like the BPR. So if I click on BPR, it's just going to actually do a render. And there you go. It's a BPR render, which is quite nice. You also have the perspective, so I can turn this on and off. And then you have the floor, so you can turn that on and off as well. Now, you can also make the floor in the X, the Y, or the Z axis, right? But you'll see this one has, again, I'm gonna go ahead and switch to the full monitor so you can see. Hopefully you can see every item or every icon that has a little corner, it allows you to hold it. And if you hold it, it allows you to select things a little bit easier. So again, another fantastic integration. So I can do this. So for the perspective, and I can change the camera like so. I can change the focal length, the field of view, all of that within the perspective. I can turn that on and off, right? So very cool stuff. Just keep in mind, if you see anything that has a little icon or like a little arrow, you can hold that. Let's say this one, this little butterfly is for symmetry. So if you hold it, it allows you to select things like radial symmetry or work in multiple axes. And again, I just think it's just a fantastic way to integrate things in a very simple UI. So I'm really happy about that. Now, another thing that I want to mention, which doesn't have anything to do with the functionality, I think I just want to mention because it's cool. Like all the new icons that have been implemented on this version for the iPad, they're fantastic. So like the little butterfly is a pretty obvious one for symmetry, but then you also have the symmetry or the same icon, but it has like a little pin. And this is for dynamic symmetry. So basically you can have symmetry based on the pivot of your gizmo. So this is amazing. Then you also have obviously the framing that allows you to, let's turn this off, allows you to frame your character. So if for some reason it just goes away like that, you can just frame it easily. And it works in the same way as the PC. You can just press it once. It would fit the entire set of tools or subtools that you have. If you press it once again, it just focuses on the one you have selected, which in my case are these arms. And that brings me back to, let's jump a couple of these ones. I want to click on solo so that you can see that's the one that I have selected. The next one is the polyframe. Let's go ahead and frame this again so you can see. So we have polyframe. Again, you can hold it and you can go just by showing the color or the fill or just the line. So all of that is in there. And then you have the transparency options with ghost on and off in here. So let's get out of solo mode. And if I go in transparency, you see now we have full transparency for the rest of the subtools. And I can also enable ghost, right? Now let's go back in here. Let's turn this off. And finally, the solo mode, which, by the way, I'll show you another customization for the UI. I'll show you that in another video, like I said. But if I press with 4 fingers, that gets me into solo mode. Again, 4 fingers, it brings back everything on. So this is the type of things that I find really handy and really easy to customize, especially to work on the iPad. So I can be working on something like this. I can just go ahead and maybe select this other part, this sort of like poncho thing, or tap with 4 fingers and start working with this. Right? Let's frame that and let's get out of solo mode by pressing with 4 fingers. All right. So that basically covers the entirety of the UI except this little thing floating that I have here. But very briefly, what this does is kind of like your access to your modifiers. And that allows you to work without the need of any keyboard or anything like that, all within the iPad. And that's what I think is really, really valuable. So I use the icons. You can change all of that. I'll show you that as well. But if I press the one on the left-hand side, that accesses my masking brushes. So if I hold it, you'll see at the bottom, we have all the masking tools straight away. And I can still, go through the custom ones. So if I go to mine, so this is my custom toolbar at the bottom. The only masking that I have, like a custom brush, is this one, the one that is non-grayed out or not grayed out. And then the same thing with my custom palette that I have here. So really handy stuff, and they change dynamically. Now this masking, obviously the little mask makes sense, so that icon is really good. Then you also have the minus and the plus icon, that is your Alt button. So essentially this allows you to switch between adding plus or subtracting the minus. That's the idea of the icon. So you can hold the Alt key to, let's say, select something else. This is the same way that happens that works in PC. So I can press Alt and tab, let's say, something like the hat of this guy. And now if I go into solo mode, you see that is the one selected. So you can select multiple, or not multiple, you can select the subtool that you want to work on without the need to open up the subtools. All right, now the next one is here at the top. This is your Shift key. So that allows you to smooth things out when you're working. So essentially you have Shift, Control, and Alt. Those are the 3 modifiers. The fourth one though is your Quick Palette. So if I hold this one, you have this dynamic menu. Now this is the default one. Again, if in the free version of ZBrush, this is the one that you're gonna get, but in the full version of the ZBrush for iPad, you can actually customize it. So right now, I can just go ahead and swipe, and I have my custom menu one. So this is something that I use constantly and is not part of the other palettes that I have in the UI. So I can mirror and weld, I can, auto group, I can group mask, delete hidden, extract. So I have things that I use in, almost on a daily basis in here. I can go ahead and flick again to have another custom menu. So this is custom menu 2. And I have things like Dynamesh settings that I use, the zero measure, even though I have it here at the bottom, I kind of like use these ones a lot. So I just basically compress the ones that I use the most in here. And then I have dynamic subdivision and divide, subdivide, that sort of thing. And also I have the project history. So things that I use on a constant basis to, let's say, polish an object and create subtools and that sort of thing. One more thing that I should mention though is you see you have these arrows at the top. These arrows are not to swap between different menus. These arrows is to place this menu in a different location. So let's say I'm right-handed, so that's why I have this on my left-hand side. But if I click on this one, they will appear here. So now every time that I press this quick menu, the quick menu will appear here. So that is really handy, and I can do the same thing. Just swipe with my, you can do it with a finger or you can do it with the pen. So this is fantastic. This is the ultimate convenience of ZBrush for iPad, is the ability to customize things to access anything that you want on the fly. So that's what I've done with this quick menu. And what I focus on is on things that I use on a constant basis, like I said, that are not necessarily easily accessed from the other menus that are part of the UI. All right, and there are a couple of items that I skipped until the end just because they're very, very important, which are these 2 things at the top of the UI. And you see they're slightly separate from the rest of the palette. But those are your access to the entire set of palettes that comes with ZBrush, obviously, as well as your subtools. So the one at the bottom, this layer sort of icon, that's essentially your subtools. And I think it is an icon that clearly makes sense. So I have all of my subtools here. And by the way, I want to show you, I have this character. I have them all in the lowest subdivision, but it has, hopefully it goes into frame, 14 million polygons. So pretty handy stuff. I mean, you can work. I think when I was working and testing it, I pushed one and it only crashed when I got to 32 or 42 million actually. So pretty decent. So 14 million, that's more than enough. And that is obviously made out of a bunch of subtools. So this is a list of subtools. You have access to the polypaint, exactly the same as you have in the PC version. So you can just turn this on and off. Let me just actually find something that is more obvious. Here we go, this one. All right, so I can turn on and off the polypaint. You can also turn on off the actual subtool. And one of my favorite things in terms of the workflow or how to interact with the iPad is that you can actually select a subtool and then you can flick it if you want to delete it, like so. So that is pretty handy. Just because before, in the PC version, you have to select it, you have to go at the bottom and you have to do delete and that sort of thing. Anyway, by the way, those menus for like delete and make all of the subtools to the high subdivision level, all of that, it is within these 3 dots in here. So if you click on these 3 dots, you have all low, all high. Let me actually zoom in a little bit. And by the way, I'm not going to cover the navigation necessarily because it is so intuitive. There's no need to. You just use 2 fingers to pan or to zoom in and out by pinching. And in my case, I can use 1 finger anywhere to rotate. You can change this method. I'll show you how like I say, in another video when we start customizing things. But that's how you navigate. So it's pretty straightforward. All right. So going back to what I was saying, let's go ahead and select something like the head. So I'm going to press Alt and select the head. And let's see. Yeah, this is the head. And let's go ahead and open up the subtools. If I go ahead and click on these icons right here, I can go to all high. So this is going to send all the subtools to the high subdivision level. So now you're actually visualizing the 14 million polygons on the go. So it's going to be a little bit slower than if they were not present, but you can see it's not too bad, right? So I can visualize 14 million polygons pretty smoothly. All right, so that's what I wanted to cover, that the subtools, let's say, in this section are really handy to see. So let's push this one like so. And yeah, these are very, very easy. You can also create folders by clicking on this icon right here. You can duplicate subtools, so you can just select one subtool, I don't know, something like this, and click on duplicate, and it will be duplicated. And then you can click on this plus icon, and that allows you to add or append different tools. So you can click on this one, and you see you have the option to add any of these primitives, or you can actually append them. And the append works better if you have other projects or other tools, other tools open, and then you can just bring them in. But this is basically how the subtools work. That's it. Now you have a bunch of other actions, but I'm not going to cover that because again, it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go through every single menu. You can split things, that sort of thing. And these are what I use, or these are the tools or features that I use to customize my quick menu. This one right here. All right. Another really cool thing about this, I mean, in this case, doesn't make much sense because we have the icon here. So I'll show you with a different palette. But what I'm talking about is these icons right here, these dots. So if you click on this one and drag it, that creates this floating bar, right? And this floating bar, you can put it anywhere, and whatever works for you. So if it works over here, all you need to do is click on the thing or the icon, and it will bring up the palette. So if you're working on a feature or a concept or something that requires you to use certain features more than usual, you can customize this just for the work that you're doing really quickly. And the way that it works is I'm going to click on this icon now. Actually, let's turn this off for a second. Click on this icon, and you can see these are all your palettes. So this is the tool palette, the alpha palette, all of that. Like I said, some of these palettes are here on the left-hand side, so there's no need to tear them off and put them in the custom little floating bar. But let's say something like, let's find something interesting. I don't know, maybe you're recording a time lapse or something. So I'm going to click on the movie. So the movie has all your options here to create a turntable, to export a time lapse, all of that good stuff. So if I click on this again and I move it around, I basically took that out of the palettes bar, and now it is in my floating bar. So I now have access to the subtools that I put in here, and I also have to the movie settings, access to the movie settings. One extra thing is that you can click on this icon if you want to collapse the left-hand side, so it's a little bit cleaner. In my case, I don't mind. I don't keep them open for too long, so I like to see the actual name of things and modifiers and all of that. So that is in there. Now you can click on these three dots in here, and you can add a new palette the same way that I just showed you by clicking here and clicking on the dots. You can do the same thing here. You can click on add a palette, go to, let's say, camera, and now you have the camera palette. Pretty straightforward. The way that you remove a palette is by selecting it. Let's say the movie one. You can click on these icons and click on delete, and that's it. And that actually removes the entire bar. But again, it's very easy to bring back one. Now, let me just show you something else that is quite interesting about this bar that I showed you. So let's say if I want to take the subtools and put them here for whatever reason, and let's also add the material. Let's drop that in there, the material palette, and let's find something else, maybe light. All right, so I have three elements or three custom palettes in my floating bar. And what I wanted to show you is that you can actually, let's say, bring in the subtools, and you see it opens up the full length of it. But you can actually use these lines right here to change how it appears. So let me just switch back again so you can see this a bit more clear now that you know which one I'm going to be sort of like switching to. So if I click on this bar, I can collapse this, and let's say I only see these three subtools, and then I'm not interested in seeing that much at the bottom, so I can just push this one up a little bit, and let's readjust this. And maybe this is how I want to work. I want to work with these three subtools, and maybe with the visibility subtool or the visibility groups, right? So the cool thing about this is that I can switch to another palette that shows me the full version. Maybe I can change this as well, and this one. But when I switch back, I can still see exactly the size that I left. So I don't know. It's a very subtle and very simple thing, but I quite like it. So instead of using this version that gives you the full kind of like length of everything, I have this custom, not that one, sorry. I have this custom floating bar that I can put anywhere, and you can customize the length of it. So I don't know. I think personally, these are the little subtle things that help you customize the UI to work a little bit more efficiently. So I love this one. Let's go ahead and delete all of that. And just to wrap up this quick overview, remember, I'm going to do some more videos with more in-depth things on how to customize things and how to actually navigate and work in ZBrush for creating something new. But this is kind of like to give you the overview. So let's go ahead and wrap it up by clicking on the preference on the top right corner. This one right here. And in the preference, this is where you can change a few things. So I'm going to do a tiny video where I'm going to cover this so that if you're only interested in this, you can just watch it on that video. But mainly, what I wanted to show you is the input. So the input is the first tab, and this is where you can change most of the things that I personally change. So at the bottom, if you look at where I'm kind of like touching right now. These three things is what I change the undo, the redo, and the solo mode. So 2 fingers or 2 fingers tap, that for me, the best action is undo, but you can change it to absolutely anything you want. For the 3 fingers, I just do redo. And the only reason I choose this is because these are the actions that I'm familiar with in another application that I use in the iPad called Procreate. So in Procreate is 2 taps to undo, or 2 finger tap to undo, 3 to redo. So in ZBrush now, it is the same thing. So if I select, let's select the head again. Let's go into solo mode. Again, we're going to cover like proper sculpting and things like that later on. I'm going to go with some of my custom brushes here. And let's go ahead and do something like so. Maybe change the brush size a bit. It's not very visible. Let me increase the intensity. All right, there we go. Right. So if we do something like that and I want to go back, I don't have to use this button, which I could. I just use the 2 finger tap to undo or 3 finger tap to redo. Right. So I can just go back and forth in the timeline. Okay. So that's the idea with this custom setup here at the bottom, and then obviously 4 fingers to go into solo mode. Now the other thing apart from these gestures that I want to show you is the touch navigation. So the touch navigation by default, I believe, is set to none, meaning that if it is off, now I can use my finger, and let me just switch back in here so you can see. I can just go ahead and use my finger and I can actually sculpt directly. Now this, I don't really see the point of being able to sculpt with your hand when you have access to your pen, because again, you don't have access to like pressure sensitivity, and it's not very, precise, right? So that one to me doesn't make sense. Instead, what I want to do is click on this, set it to touch on or touch navigation, and that means I can use 1 single finger to navigate even if I'm on top of the interface. Now, I want to mention this only because if you are familiar with the other way around, or you want to leave that off, so let's do that. You can still manipulate the, the navigation can work exactly the same as the ZBrush for PC. So if you hold, for instance, Alt, you can click outside, and that allows you to move things around. And it's the same thing. You can rotate by clicking with your finger outside. So that is exactly the same thing. And of course, if you have 2 fingers, you can still move things around like so. And now going back to the way that ZBrush PC works, you can use 2 fingers to, again, manipulate the panning as well as the pinching. If I let go of, let's say, my thumb, and I still use my just 1 finger, I can rotate around. So that's kind of like the rotation, or like the way that you rotate or manipulate the canvas in ZBrush for PC. So you have the 2 options. I just think it's easier to leave this one on and work with the pinch, 1 single click or 1 single finger to rotate around, and then 2 fingers to pan in and out. So very, very simple. But those are the main things that I change or that I customize so that I can work a little bit faster. Now, the other couple of things that you can try, I found them a little bit distracting and it wasn't really working for me. I mean, it was working well for the interface and everything, but I just don't find it useful, and I mistakenly change things that I don't want to. It is this double tap and squeeze. So the double tap, it has to do with your fingers. So you can set it up like this and set any of these actions to go to work like that. So for example, I can set it to solo mode, and let's switch the 4 fingers to be, I don't know, toggle lazy mouse, for example, right? So right now I don't have lazy mouse. If I press 2 fingers, I think I now have lazy mouse. The lazy mouse on this brush is not extreme, but there you go. Whereas if I double tap the pen, I'll go out of solo mode. So let's get this back to what it was. So I'm going to leave this one off. This one is going to be solo mode. So those are the things. I haven't tried the squeeze, but I suppose it works in the same way. And I think this has to do with it, depending on what type of pen you actually have, right? And to wrap up, just like I said, if you want to start customizing things, I'm going to cover this in its own video. But if you click on this icon right here, this is basically how you customize the bars at the bottom. So again, let me actually go into the full screen here so you can see better. So I have the default bar at the top. This one has a little lock, so it means you cannot change that one. That has to stay there by default, but you can flick to the next bar, and then you can just add one. So just for the fun of it, I'm gonna go to the last one, or custom bar 03, and I'm gonna use my finger to click and hold any brush. So let's say this curve alpha. So I'm gonna click and hold, and I'm gonna drop it in there. So that's how easy it is to add these ones. Let's go ahead and use something like the curve flat. Let's find something else, maybe the curve tubes as well. I don't know, things that I might use for whatever reason. the cloth move, maybe drop it in there. And maybe these are like obviously all the brushes, but I can filter by user. So that's are the custom brushes that I added. Something that I use often might be these custom masks, so I can drop it there. So you can see, you can add absolutely any brush that you want in there. So now this custom bar would appear at the bottom, right? And you can also delete the bar by using the little, this one right here, this little bin, if you want to just get rid of one. Right, I'll get rid of that one in a second. But then you also have the quick menu here at the top. So I'm going to use the touch just to show you where things are. So this one right here. So if I touch on quick menu, this is essentially what I customize. So you see again at the top here of this quick menu, we have this lock. So this one has to stay. This is kind of like the menu that you get when you press a spacebar in the PC version. But if you flick to the right, then you have this custom menu 1. These are the ones that I've added. Custom menu 2, 3, and so on. I can add more. So let's create a custom menu 4. I'm just going to hold these split parts, drop it in there. I'm going to use this visibility, grow polygroups, and then fiber mesh. Let's add, I don't know, modifiers. This is very random, but I just want to show you in case you want to customize it already. But like I said, I'm going to do a short video dedicated on how, best practices to customize this sort of thing. So that means that when I click on done, and if I scroll first to show you the custom bar that we created for the bottom, now we have this bar that has these 5 brushes that I would use in specific scenario, right? And then if I press my quick menu in here and go to the end, right? That's the split parts, the grow polygroups, and the fiber mesh as well. So, a random thing, but it's very easy to do. So I'm just gonna go back to the ones I have. So this one, and I'm gonna go ahead and drop these ones to the bin just to remove all of that, so I don't need it. And the same thing with the quick menu. Let's go back to the quick menu. I'm going to go to the last one, and I'm going to click on these things and drop them into the bin because I don't need them. Now, one thing I should mention, I wish that you could just delete the entire menu and that's it, but maybe this is something that they want to implement later. At the moment, if you want to remove a whole thing, you just need to delete all the pieces as well. All right, and finally, to wrap this up, you can also use these kind of like head, the 3D cam view to move things around. I don't find this one as useful in the iPad as I do in the PC version. You also have at the top right, the kind of like the silhouette. So I can actually click on that one and drag, and you can scale it a little bit. Again, I don't find this one as useful. So what I do is I go straight to the preferences first. I go to the the UI. And in the UI, I can turn off the thumbnail and can turn off the cam view. So this is my preferred way of working. I just have slightly more real estate, and I don't find these 2 things as useful as I use them in the PC version. So those are the 2 things. And finally, this is the last thing I promise. This is the undo history. So the undo history is pretty convenient. So if you want to do things like projecting from history or using something like the history brush or things like that, in the PC version, you usually hold Control and click a point in the timeline. You keep doing stuff, and then you can record or recall that point. Now in here, it's a little bit hard because you don't have those points. This is your entire undo history. So what you can do is, again, let's go ahead and get closer here. Go into solo mode. Maybe do a couple more things just to show you. You can take this slider and scroll through the timeline. This one doesn't have that many, but you can scroll through it. And obviously you can see that this is how you can record your time lapses, or like a time lapse of how you sculpted something. But let's say if you go here and you want to save this state, or whatever that the case might be, you can click on this icon right here. And this one, you see it is, let me just switch back into the full screen here. You see it is now yellow. So I can turn this on and off. So when it's yellow, it means that we have marked a point, and now we can start doing more stuff like sculpting. And now you see that there is like a tiny little dot. I don't know if it's easier to see it in here, or if I just maybe zoom in a bit in here. All right, so you see that little dot in there? That tells you that that is your marker. So that is your marker in the undo history. So you can project from that point, or you can go back to it, and so on and so forth. If I want to remove it, I just turn this off, and that's it. But this is how you deal with the undo history, right? I'll tell you a bit more about the undo history in another video where I'm going to cover more about the custom preferences and how to set things up. But in a nutshell, that is it. That is a quick overview of the iPad for ZBrush. All right, so hopefully that gives you an insight and gets you started with the ZBrush for iPad. Like I said, I'm going to do a couple more videos showing you more specific things, and we're actually creating something directly within the iPad. But this video was more about getting you started, knowing when things are, and especially if you're already familiar with the PC version, you will be able to kind of like reference to the different places and different palettes, but in an iPad. So hopefully this helps, and let me know in the comments if you want me to cover some other things. I think it's a fantastic effort from the ZBrush guys that have put everything together into an iPad application. Personally, I have been really enjoying the beta testing because I can take what I've been working on the PC, let's say on a full-on project, send it to the iPad, and then continue there on the couch or something. Just, especially things that are very repetitive in terms of the process that I could do either on the PC or now I can do it on the iPad. So detailing, finalizing the poly paint, the bulk of it, I would try to do it on the computer, just because I have access to other things and I usually use ZBrush with other applications. But for a quick sketch or for polishing a something professional even, I can use the iPad to do that. So again, hopefully this has been of help. Let me know in the comments if you want me to cover something else, or if you have discovered something else that maybe I have missed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.